An aircraft carrier and her sister ship glided along the water, loaded to the brim with airplanes, like a mother spider with babies on her back. In an instant, these aircraft carriers could send their planes scattering into the sky, taking down planes and ships alike. Her first mission led her to the island of Oahu in December, the ocean clear and bright. She was here to attack Pearl Harbor. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Zuikaku, which translates to auspicious crane in Japanese, was the second and last shokaku-class aircraft carrier built for the Imperial Japanese Navy shortly before the commencement of the Pacific War. Of all Japanese aircraft carriers in World War II, Zuikaku was the most capable. She was laid down on May 25th of 1938 in the Kawasaki shipyards in Kobe, Japan. Before we get any further into her story, let's look at her specs. Zuikaku was a massive shokaku-class aircraft carrier with her displacement sitting at 32,105 metric tons deep load. She was 844 feet 10 inches long, had a beam of 95 feet 2 inches wide, a deep load draft of 30 feet 7 inches deep, and a depth of 75 feet 6 inches deep. As for her complement, she was serviced by 1,660 enlisted and officers. As for propulsion, she was equipped with 8 water tube boilers capable of producing 160,000 horsepower. This setup powered 4 geared steam turbines that turned 4 screws, for an average speed of 34.5 knots. Now, let's look at armor, armament, and aircraft. Let's start with armor. She had waterline belt armor that ranged from 46 to 165 millimeters thick depending upon location, and deck armor that ranged from 65 to 132 millimeters thick depending upon location. This is less armor than most other warships, but in theory should have been proficient at protecting her from shells or air attack. When we look at armament or aircraft carriers, it will typically be far less than that of other warships, being that their main mode of attack is with aircraft. She was equipped with 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 4 sets of twin mounts, and 12 1-inch anti-aircraft guns in 4 sets of triple mounts. Next, we look at the real meat and potatoes of it all, the aircraft. For aircraft, we are going to look at what she was equipped with during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Her aircraft could have varied throughout her service life, but this is the most readily available information that I can pull from. She was equipped, on average, with 72 aircraft plus 12 spares. Breaking down this aircraft, on the morning of December 7, 1941, Zuikaku had 18 Mitsubishi A6M2 Zeros, 27 Aichi D3A1 Vals, and 27 Nakajima B5N2 Kates. She was well armed and would leave devastation in her wake. World War II in Europe began on September 1, 1939, following Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. The war in the Pacific wouldn't really get going until the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, so Japan had time to prepare. Zuikaku was launched on November 27, 1939, and formally commissioned on September 25, 1941. On the day of her commissioning, Zuikaku left on her maiden voyage from Kobe to Kure Naval Base. On October 7, 1941, she departed Kure under the command of Captain Yokokawa Ichibe, headed for Oita Bight. She arrived the next day on October 8th, and she met up with her sister ship Shokaku for the very first time. These two massive ships entirely made up Carrier Division 5 on their own. Shokaku and Zuikaku were on the road to Hawaii. And we are on the road to 15,000 subscribers. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comment section below. Alright folks, it's time to get into Pearl Harbor. On November 26, 1941, Zuikaku left Hitokapu Bay to head to Honolulu for the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was acting as part of the Kido Butai, or Mobile Force. Like I stated earlier, she had 18 Zero fighters, 27 Val dive bombers, and 27 Kate torpedo bombers for aircraft. Just before 8 a.m. local time on December 7, 1941, Zuikaku launched 2 waves of aircraft against American military installations on the island of Oahu. In the first wave, 25 VAL dive bombers attacked Wheeler Army Airfield, and 5 Zero fighters attacked the airbase at Kaneohe. In the second wave launched, 27 high-level Kate bombers attacked the airbase at Hickam Field. The attack at Pearl Harbor was disastrous for the United States, as 4 battleships were damaged, 3 light cruisers were damaged, 3 destroyers were damaged, 3 other ships damaged, and 159 aircraft were damaged. As for total destruction, 4 battleships were sunk, 1 X-battleship was sunk, 1 harbor tug was sunk, and 188 aircraft were destroyed. 3 civilian aircraft were shot down. 2,008 sailors, 109 Marines, 208 soldiers, and 68 civilians were killed, for a total of 2,403 people that lost their lives. 1,178 were wounded, with 35 being civilians. It was a catastrophic loss, and as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, it was a day that went down in infamy. Japan did suffer losses as the Americans attempted to defend themselves, and that does need to be noted. 4 midget submarines were sunk, 1 midget submarine was grounded, 29 aircraft were destroyed, 74 aircraft were damaged, 129 were killed, and 1 sailor was captured. Japan would declare war on the United States later that day on December 8th in Tokyo, and the British immediately declare war on Japan. The following day, December 8th in the US, America declared war on Japan, and thus began the war in the Pacific. On December 24th, Zuikaku arrived back in Kure with Shokaku, Kaga, and Akagi. Soryu and Hiryu departed to attack Wake Island, so they didn't stick around. Zuikaku was dry docked from December 30th to January 3rd, 1942. She met up with Shokaku on January 5th, and they departed Hiroshima Bay on the 8th. They arrived at Truk on the 14th. Zuikaku and her sister would assist the Japanese in their conquest against the Pacific Islands starting on January 20th, then returning to Truk on the 29th. Zuikaku took part in a failed attempt to sweep for Allied aircraft carriers on February 1st, before departing back to Japan, arriving at Yokosuka on the 13th, where her pilots took part in vigorous training exercises until the 28th. Next, we move into the Indian Ocean raid. All of Kido Butai, including Zuikaku and excluding Kaga, who had scraped her hull on a reef and needed repairs, would take part in the Indian Ocean raid, attacking various British warships and positions in a multiple-day attack. On April 5th, Zuikaku's air group attacked Colombo in an event called the Easter Sunday Raid, and her torpedo bombers sank the destroyer HMS Tenedos. Meanwhile, her dive bombers damaged the tanker San Cirilo, and later than not, her and Shokaku's aircraft engaged and sank the heavy cruisers HMS Cornwall and Dorsetshire. And here they destroyed the cargo ship SS Sagang and damaged the monitor HMS Erebus. One of the first aircraft carriers in existence, HMS Hermes, would find herself in the crosshairs. Later in the evening on the 9th, a float plane from Haruna located Hermes, and Zuikaku's air group launched almost immediately, quickly followed by Shokaku. They swarmed Hermes like ants on a cupcake, bombers hitting Hermes almost 40 times. They turned the once beautiful carrier into a smoking hulk, with planes from Akagi joining in. Akagi's planes sank HMAS Vampire by themselves, and the floating wreckage of Hermes sank quickly, having only shot down 6 planes in her defense. Zuikaku and Shokaku were the first aircraft carriers in history to sink an enemy aircraft carrier in combat. The Battle of the Coral Sea was an enormous carrier-on-carrier battle, and Zuikaku was a major player in it. In May of 1942, Zuikaku and Shokaku were assigned to Operation Mo, which was the invasion of Port Moresby, New Guinea. On May 7th, Furutaka and Kinugasa spotted ships nearby, fearing they were carriers and prompted the launching of planes. It turns out it was a U.S. convoy, and they attacked anyway, not wanting resources to go to waste. Planes from Zuikaku and Shokaku sunk the destroyer Sims and the oil tanker Nyosho. The Americans intercepted and decrypted Japanese naval messages, then dispatching Yorktown and Lexington to stop the Japanese from moving forward. On the same day of the initial attack, American planes located the light carrier Shoho, and they sank her. Both Zuikaku and Shokaku sent out plane squadrons to scout for U.S. carriers, failing to make contact on the 7th. On the 8th, Zuikaku and Shokaku were located by a spotter plane from Lexington, and both carriers attacked. Zuikaku hid within a rain squall, however Shokaku was hit 3 times, unable to launch or recover aircraft. To clap back, Zuikaku's planes found the American carriers and attacked with fury. Torpedo bombers caught Lexington in an anvil attack, hitting the flat top with 2 torpedoes, cutting her speed down to 24 knots and punching through gasoline storage tanks, leaking toxic gas fumes throughout the ship. Dive bombers then crippled Yorktown, hitting her with a bomb that caused severe damage to the hangar bay and aviation storage rooms, as well as over a dozen near misses. Dive bombers from Shokaku hit Lexington 3 times on her flight deck, causing a fire. Damage control persisted on Lexington, quelching the fires. However, gas fumes still leaked throughout the ship, and when they reached the electric motors, sparks caused a chain reaction of explosion after explosion, and she began to sink. Her crew was evacuated, and she was scuttled by escorting destroyers to ensure she wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Zuikaku remained undamaged, but sustained severe losses in aircrew and aircraft. Thus, she and her damaged sister ship returned to Japan to resupply, retrain new aircrew, and repair shokaku. Neither ship participated in the Battle of Midway, and in this battle in June of 1942, every carrier that had attacked Pearl Harbor other than Shokaku and Zuikaku was sunk by the Americans. Both ships had retreated to Kure, and there they stayed through June and July of 1942. Moving forward, we get into the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. In August of 1942, she was dispatched as part of the 1st Carrier Division along with Shokaku, newly repaired, and their escorts to oppose the American offensive in the Solomon Islands. Their goal? Sink the U.S. ships operating in the Solomons to recapture Henderson Field. On August 24th, heavy cruiser Chikuma launched a float plane, and this float plane happened upon a large American task force, including the aircraft carriers USS Enterprise and USS Saratoga, and their escorts, including 11 destroyers, 4 cruisers, and the battleship USS North Carolina. Zuikaku and Shokaku launched 37 aircraft together and attacked the carriers. Due to the haste of the Japanese pilots, almost all of the attacks were focused on Enterprise with devastating results. However, North Carolina's anti-aircraft fire was effective, shooting down plane after plane. After 3 direct hits, Enterprise was crippled and nearly sunk. The final blow was ready to be delivered, with 7 dive bombers zooming in. Luckily, North Carolina was ready and shot down all 7 dive bombers, saving Enterprise. Zuikaku and Shokaku were unscathed, though Shokaku was nearly bombed by aircraft from Enterprise. Out of the 37 aircraft they launched, they lost 25, and the light carrier Ryuho was lost from planes launched by Saratoga. Planes from Henderson Field sank the troop ship Kinryu Maru and the destroyer Mutsuki, with the Americans winning the battle and Japan retreating without sinking a single American ship. The next battle she finds herself entangled in would be the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands. The U.S. was dominating out of Henderson Field. However, their carrier force was greatly reduced. After her big action, Saratoga was crippled by a torpedo, and in September of that year, USS Wasp was sunk. USS Hornet was the only American fleet carrier operating in the Pacific at the time, joined shortly by the newly repaired Enterprise. The Japanese recognized this, and taking advantage of the Americans' weakness, Zuikaku and Shokaku were sent out to attack Hornet and Enterprise, joined by the aircraft carrier Junyo and the light carrier Zuiho and their escorts. This would come to a head at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands. The Japanese set out on October 11th, and on the 15th, one of their patrol planes spotted the destroyer USS Meredith towing a barge filled with bombs and fuel for U.S. forces at Guadalcanal. Quickly, Zuikaku reacted, and her aircraft dispatched Meredith in just a matter of 10 minutes, with 3 torpedoes and a number of bombs, causing the destroyer to roll over and sink. The force moved on with their day, and were spotted on the 26th by a Catalina seaplane, shortly followed by air attack from Hornet and Enterprise. This is exactly what the Japanese were waiting for. Dive bombers from Enterprise hit Zuiho with a bomb that prevented her from recovering aircraft, and dive bombers from Hornet scorched Shokaku with at least 3 to 4, potentially up to 6 bomb hits, and damaged Chikuma with 2 bombs. The Japanese were waiting with a clapback. They wreaked havoc on American ships, with fighters from Zuiho shooting down an American torpedo bomber. This launched a series of mind-boggling events, with the torpedo somehow deploying as she crashed in a disastrous friendly fire incident that sank the destroyer USS Porter. Junyo damaged the battleship USS South Dakota and the light cruiser San Juan with bomb hits. Zuikaku narrowed her sights on Hornet, hitting her with 3 bomb hits. 2 of her bombers were shot down and crashed into Hornet, one of which still had its bomb equipped, which subsequently exploded on impact. Meanwhile, planes from Shokaku swarmed Hornet and hit her with 2 torpedoes. This left Hornet dead in the water, listing heavily. Though attempts were made to save her, eventually, after further attacks, Hornet was abandoned. Zuikaku hit Hornet with another bomb and crippled Enterprise yet again with 2 bomb hits. Enterprise evacuated the battle while US destroyers began to scuttle the Hornet. This failed, but Hornet still slowly sank. She was discovered listing at a 45-degree angle when Akigumo and Makigumo, 2 destroyers, discovered her and shot her with torpedoes, adding the final nails in the coffin. Of 110 aircraft launched by the Japanese carriers, only 67 returned to Zuikaku. She then returned home for training and aircraft ferrying duties. We aren't done yet. In February of 1943, she covered the evacuation of Japanese ground forces from Guadalcanal. In May, she was assigned to a completely different part of the ocean, destined to head to the Aleutian Islands near Alaska. However, this operation was cancelled after the Allied victory on Attu on May 29, 1943. Later on, in 1943, she was again based at Truk and operated against US forces in the Marshall Islands, but never managed to see combat throughout the rest of the year. She started out 1944 in dry dock at Kure on January 8th, and she left dry dock on January 17th. On February 13th, Zuikaku was assigned to Carrier Division 1 alongside Shokaku. Over the next 2 days, she received her air group, but her new pilots were poorly trained and inexperienced, a stark difference from the days of Kido Butai. However, they were sufficient enough to score another kill for Zuikaku on February 27th. Her torpedo bombers hunted down the submarine USS Greyback and quickly she sank after a single 551-pound bomb hit. She ferried aircraft to Singapore and was dry docked shortly after this. Later, she joined Shokaku and the new armored aircraft carrier Taiho. In June of 1944, she was assigned to Operation A-Go, an attempt to repulse the Allied invasion of the Mariana Islands. On June 19th, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Taiho and Shokaku were both sunk by American submarines, leaving Zuikaku alone, the only survivor of Carrier Division 1. She had to recover the division's fleeing aircraft, and on June 20th, a bomb hit started a fire in the hangar, but Zuikaku's damage control team was experienced and got it under control, and she escaped on her own. After this battle, Zuikaku was the only survivor of the 6 fleet carriers that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was the last survivor. But as a member, you're in good company. This episode couldn't be possible without our amazing YouTube members and patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Okay, it's time to look at her final battle. Lastly, she was involved in the battle off Cape Engaño. In October 1944, she was the flagship of Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's decoy northern force in Operation Shogo 1, the Japanese counterattack to the American landings at Leyte. She was a part of the 3rd Carrier Division, which was seriously depleted, with only 108 aircraft between the 4 carriers. And on October 24th, she launched aircraft alongside Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda in an ineffective strike against the U.S. 3rd Fleet. Many of these planes were shot down, and the majority of the surviving aircraft did not return to the carriers, instead landing at Luzon. However, some of Zuikaku's aircraft made kamikaze attacks and helped sink USS Princeton. Let's briefly go over kamikaze attacks for our younger audience members and those unaware. Kamikaze, which stands for Divine Wind or Spirit Wind in Japanese, and were officially known as Shinpu Tokubetsu Kogekitai, which translates to Divine Wind Special Attack Unit, were a part of the Japanese special attack units of military aviators who flew suicide attacks for the Empire of Japan against Allied naval vessels in the closing stages of the Pacific Campaign of World War II, intending to destroy warships more effectively than with conventional air attacks. About 3,800 kamikaze pilots died during the war, and more than 7,000 naval personnel were killed by kamikaze attacks. Most of the other surviving aircraft were sent to other surviving carriers and air bases, later sinking the escort carrier USS St. Lo during the Battle off Shamar, after again using the new kamikaze tactics. The next day, during the battle off Cape Engaño, she launched her few remaining aircraft for combat air patrol, search, or to join the aircraft already on Luzon. Then she came under heavy air attack, being hit by 7 torpedoes and 9 bombs. She started listing heavily to port, and Ozawa shifted his flag to the light cruiser Oyodo. The order to abandon ship was ordered at 1:58 p.m. and her naval ensign was lowered. As she rolled to port and her flag was lowered, her sailors saluted. She then rolled completely over and sank stern first at 2:14 p.m., taking 842 crew and Rear Admiral Kaizuka Takeo with her. 862 officers and crew were rescued by Wakatsuki and Kuwa, 2 destroyers nearby. She was the only Japanese fleet carrier, as opposed to light carrier, sunk by aircraft-launched torpedoes, as all others were sunk by dive bombers or submarine-launched torpedoes. With her sinking, the last aircraft carrier to have attacked Pearl Harbor disappeared into the Pacific. Zuikaku was a force to be reckoned with, and will forever be remembered for her role in the attack on Pearl Harbor. She and her sister ship were highly destructive in the war in the Pacific, taking down ship after ship with their aircraft. However, in the end, there was no escaping the wrath of the U.S. Navy. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our World War II Warships playlist in the cards. Tune in next week for the story of TEV Wahin, a New Zealander ro-ro ferry that wrecked in the 1960s. Thank you for tuning into Shipwreck Sunday, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.